Welcome to Empowering the Unseen, a speaker series where we focus on stories and perspectives that aren't typically considered in the public narrative around HIV and AIDS. My name is Marisa. I am an intern with Until There's a Cure, and I'm incredibly excited to have some conversations with individuals about their experiences and expertise in HIV and AIDS advocacy, prevention, treatment, and education. I know I'm excited to learn something new, and I hope you can too. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
Good. I'm good.
First things first, how did you get into, how'd you get interested in HIV education, research, prevention, etc.? Yeah.
Yeah. I would say I got interested just because I grew up in Atlanta, in like the 80s and 90s and was aware of the epidemic as a teen myself and was actually where it looked really different in Atlanta compared to like what you hear globally as well as what you hear in the rest of the US. And so I knew I wanted to do stuff with young people and HIV. And so that's kind of what really got me going. And so I just kind of made sure I kind of maneuvered my career in a way that would allow me to do this.
Yeah. So one thing you said, it looked different in Atlanta, at least from your perception. How so is that?
Yeah, even in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of emphasis, one on the fact that um there were a lot of African American men that were advocates. Like in the US, it was definitely like white upper class white men that were advocates. But then too in Atlanta, there was also a heavy emphasis on the fact that it was affecting a lot of Black women. And so there were some gender differences as well as race differences. And it's more not necessarily differences, but being highlighted that we weren't seeing highlighted in the rest of the country, at least at that.
I see. Yeah, and I think it's an excellent point. I think even today there's still this public perception of it being the epidemic affecting men and specifically white men. And so, I mean, today it's especially in the South, women and Black women, it's an issue there. So I think that's why I was interested to talk to you because I know that's where you
Yeah.
specifically work. So, as you said, you maneuvered your career around this realization you had growing up. So, would you say that you were interested in medicine before then, or was that something that prompted your interest in this?
I don't know if it prompted my interest in medicine. I think, different people along the way, even from when I was a child, were like, yeah, you're probably going to do something in medicine or be a doctor. I had experiences like I had a grandmother who had breast cancer and had one of her breasts removed and had her stitches completely dehisced. And I was like 6 or 8. It was helping her. She's a nurse from like the wars. So I'm helping her trying to suture herself at least somewhat back together until she can get to the doctor's office because it's just her and I over the summer. And so even stuff like that always happened. But I mean, I don't know. Everybody asked me what kind of made me really think about doing medicine. I don't know if I have a great answer about that, but I have had a lot of different experiences at all stages of life where I've interacted with either young people or people with HIV. And that's probably more of a direct threat where like mentoring youth and like one of the youth I had in college that was my mentee, both her parents died from AIDS or from advanced HIV. And like I just remember how she was treated by her aunt, and her aunt really was just who had a daughter that was her age. So there's 2 children now the same age, but her aunt wouldn't touch her or anything like that. There was like no emotional connection because of the fact that there was a perception that she had HIV since her parents died of it.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, so it's stuff like that. I volunteered at Whitman Walker Clinic, which I don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's in DC and
Yeah.
maybe the early 2000s. That was probably one of the largest HIV clinics. And so, just different experiences.
Yeah, with working with youth and mentor programs. So, first of all, how did you see the need just with instances like the girl you were speaking of with families, or how did you see the need for that? And then logistically, how did you go about implementing that?
Yeah, I would say I think one of the things that's always been interesting to me, probably as a teen, late teen on till now even, is really health literacy. And so I had learned enough about HIV even at that point in college to where I was like, okay, this information is correct. And then now you're like imposing your incorrect ideas and stereotypes what HIV is onto this like 11, 12-year-old young lady, which is going to impact her for the rest of her life. So that's kind of where my mind kind of goes to, is like, how can I help provide education to people? And so that's that. And the mentoring has just kind of been a theme throughout. I just left Birmingham, and myself and two colleagues started a mentoring program that's been going on. This is year 8 or 9. So like that just kind of comes with the territory of loving to work with young people, and wanting to like give them the resources, whatever they may be, that they need to kind of excel and be awesome in life. So
Yeah. And you were talking about just now, especially that start the girl, but the misconceptions people have. What have you noticed in your work that are the most common misconceptions that maybe the public has?
I would say, excuse me, the first one is really like that adults and teens alike don't really think HIV is still a thing. And I don't mean like, I'm not even talking about the death sentence, because there is this kind of still perception that among people that are aware of it, that it is a death sentence. So that's one misconception. But there are a lot of people that just like, oh yeah, HIV, that was like so 80s, 90s. Like that's not going on. And they're saying it from the standpoint of like, how do you mean I have HIV? That's no longer a thing. And so, especially in the South too, where we have a lot of different, I guess in the US, there's a lot of different legislation around like sex education, but particularly in the South, this we don't talk about it a lot. And there's so many different communities here in the South, despite maybe what people think, in a lot of communities. So whether it's cultural, race, country of origin, whatever, we just don't talk about sex enough, let alone HIV. And so the idea that you can still get it is something that I come across, particularly when I have new diagnoses that are younger, like 24 and under. I still run into people, whether it's patients' families, or just people in the street, that think that you can get HIV from sharing a fork, or they at least ask. You get the toilet seat, all those kind of things. So we still have that level of misconception as well. And then I think what's been interesting, and what I speak about most just in everyday conversations, is there are still a lot of people that think like, if you have HIV, you're going to give it to someone else, period. There's nothing you can do for that not to happen. And so then I have to do a lot of talking about you equals you, or other things, to really show them like, no, these legislations that you're hearing about that say like, oh, so-and-so was going to jail because they had HIV and they happen to have sex with someone, or have been having sex with someone and they got HIV from, that doesn't even make sense as far as why they're being criminalized for it. So I do a lot of that as well.
Yeah, a lot of it is basic health literacy, so that kind of feeds not being harmful to other people. But yeah, I do think that HIV should be included in sex ed. And as you said, in the South, I'm in North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina. And North Carolina maybe has some less of that legislation, if you will, than some places, but definitely like this part of the country, it is a little more taboo. And it's like, how can we talk about add HIV into this when we can sometimes just not even talk about the basics of having sex, or have our kids be allowed to know what that is? I mean, my high school was abstinence only sex education, and fortunately my mom was an OBGYN, so I was filled in firstly on the literacy. But yeah, so how do you, in terms of being an educator, navigate both kind of that, I don't know, like a regional sentiment, if you will, but also I'm sure you come across some parents or something like that. Like, how do you navigate getting the permission to effectively talk to kids about stuff like this?
Yeah, the nice thing is that as a physician, if they're seeing me in a clinical setting, I can get one-on-one time. And 99.9% of parents, whether they like the one-on-one time with their kid or not, when I explain to them, like, I'm just trying to reinforce things that you already talk about, I'm going to help them make sure that they're developing whatever skills they need to do to become a successful adult. Most of them are okay with that. And so the good thing is that's a great way for me to have that precious time with the young person. Once I have it with the young person, from their perspective, I just ask them what they know or what they don't know, and just, fill in the gaps. From the parents, especially when I have to actually, or when I'm being asked to disclose that the young person has STI. So, if I have a young person like, well, can you tell my parent? I'm like, okay, let's have this conversation. And so, that kind of, there's a flavor of that. It just depends on the person and the parent and what kind of vibes they're giving me that's how I approach it. I'm pretty good at adapting who I am to whatever or whoever I need to be. But I take those opportunities to kind of listen for what the parent is saying as well, and kind of figuring out if they have gaps in their knowledge or if they have trouble with their own health literacy, and try to fill those gaps as well. Because I can only do what I do in the office. They're at home with this young person, or the young person's at school. And so between home and school, other people need to be supplying this kind of information. So
And in terms of, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. In terms of getting out, I mean, yes, you can do that one-on-one. And of course, people who are in your mentoring programs get that opportunity to have that literacy. But in terms of just if we're talking generally educating different communities out in the public, what do you think is the most effective way to do that?
I think representation is one. So, whatever the community is, if I happen to be Black, awesome. If I happen to be Jewish, if I happen to be maybe from an immigrant population, just having the representation and someone from that community either be the one delivering the information or partnering with someone who's delivering the information is one. And then I think the best approach is really just starting with openness. So like, this is a safe space, share with me what you know, what you don't know, and being able to think quick on your feet to figure out, like, is it the small details that they don't know, or is there a larger construct that we need to start from? So like an example I'll give that's not necessarily HIV related, but generally related is there's still people that think that if you're on your period, I can't get a urine sample from you because they think that those are coming from the same orifice. And they don't quite understand there's a urethral opening and there's a vaginal opening, right? And so if I'm talking to someone and I hear things that suggest that they don't realize that that's what's going on anatomically, versus they just are like, urine samples aren't accurate, or, I don't want you to have my child's fluid, that's a cultural perspective, right? Those are handled differently than the fact that like you actually just don't know the anatomy. So I need to fill in the gaps.
You have your master's in public health policy as well, which you did in Alabama, where I know you worked before you came to Emory. So is that, where did you decide that you wanted to go get the degree in that? And so that lines up with everything.
Yeah, I would just say patience. I knew I wanted to get that probably when I got into medical school. I was like, I want a master's. And I had talked to enough people to realize, no offense to the people with masters in epi and epidemiology, but I was like, I'm okay without that. I had wanted one in policy because I really understood, having lived in North Carolina, having lived in DC, Atlanta, Alabama, Philadelphia, I understood that policy is really where things need to happen, particularly for youth, and it's what can really make positive or negative impacts that are long lasting on youth. And so the med school I went to didn't offer that. And then I was in residency, too busy. And then as I was applying for fellowships, for adolescent medicine fellowships, and I hope you can't hear my dog who's in the background. Okay.
No, I get it.
As I was applying for adolescent medicine fellowships, I specifically was intentional on looking at programs that offered a free master's, and then that also had the option of what kind of master's I could do. And so UAB was one of the places that offered me the opportunity to have a master's that was fully paid for, and I could get it in whatever I wanted. And I knew I wanted it in policy. So
yeah, I hadn't thought about that. With you working in all those different places, you've gotten to have to like juggle the different legislation, whatever, as we talked about, what points of views and that comes with that, just with the people. What would you say was, I don't know if I say the easiest to navigate? What is some legislation that you thought, like, this is great, this is what we need more of, and what is something you're like, let's steer away from this? Do you have any specifics?
Yeah, I do. Thankfully, like, most teens can consent to like STI testing and HIV testing and treatment. Good policies, I won't say the state that it's in case that state comes under attack, but a good policy I saw was, the ability for teens of a certain age to consent to their entire medical care. It did change with COVID. Because of the politics around the COVID vaccine, they said, nope, no longer can they consent to vaccines. But like if they had asthma, they could consent to their asthma care in addition to their sexual health care. And that made things a lot easier it made things easier for us as clinical teams because we could see teens on their own. It made things easier for parents because parents didn't always have to be present in clinic. And let me clarify what that means. So some of the parents realize like, okay, I don't physically have to sign my kid into clinic because they're a certain age and they can consent to everything. Cool. Can I call you guys on the phone since I'll be at work and talk to you, like that? That way I'm not missing out on work and I'm still able to, provide information and be present for my child's visit. And that actually worked well for a lot of parents. And so they physically weren't in clinic, but we would put them on speakerphone. We would talk during the confidential time. We would mute everything and talk to the teen confidentially. And then we would still have an entire discussion with whatever parents or guardians and the young person without that parent or guardian missing work. And so I think that was a great policy. A not so great policy, and I won't mention the state that this isn't either, but a not so great policy is the policy where you require parental consent to get an HIV test. That's not a state policy. So I do various levels, but that is someone's organizational policy. So that's not a great policy, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Yes, I'll just leave it there.
Let's kind of have to deal with an access piece because if you have to go to work, but your kid is depending on you to get treatment, and so that's great. And another one of like, oh, you're that's having another adult responsible for even knowing if you need treatment. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So I'm going to jump back a little bit. So when you're talking about, you work with a lot of youth and you said people under 24 and they get a diagnosis. Just as a physician, like what do you think is the best way, or have you found, as well, if you're giving advice to other doctors, like what is the best way to approach that conversation of the diagnosis and treatment with someone that young?
Yeah. So, I go back and forth. I talk to, because I do general adolescent care and HIV care, and I give talks that span those continuums. So like, how do you screen and do like pre-exposure prophylaxis for young people that may need it to prevent HIV? And then how do you have these discussions with young people who may come to see you for primary care, but also have to see whoever for their HIV care if you're not doing all of it. And so, I always start with like, what does this young person want to be? Who do they want to be? What are their goals in life? Because that's the easiest way to approach a lot of the more stigmatized topics, including HIV, that are in healthcare. And so, whether they tell me they don't know what they want to be, or they tell me they want to be teacher, lawyer. What have I heard? I've heard someone that wants to like curate different weed strains, like, and he's very good at what is it? Not ergonomics, but the water and the plants. He's really good at that kind of stuff.
I know. I have heard a friend's mom like does that at her special needs school thing. I'll think of it.
There's a word for that, but he excels with that, and he realizes that he can make money from a weed perspective. So he wants to, like all those things. And so talking to them and realizing what they want to be and what their goals are. Once I know that, then I can ask them, well, how do you know how you go about becoming that person? Many people do, many people don't. And then I ask them, what does it look like if you were to have one of the things I call STIs? And so pregnancy falls in there, HIV falls in there, and obviously the regular STIs fall in there. So what does it look like if you were to have to take a pill every day or take an injection on a regular basis for a treatment of HIV? What does it look like for pregnancy-wise? If you're having to raise a child, if you have to give birth to a child, if you have to co-parent a child as a teenager, I ask them those kind of things, and it makes them stop and pause. And then it allows me to ask the question of like, well, okay, so you've already told me you're doing X, Y, and Z behaviors, whatever they are, sex, drugs, cutting, restricting, you're eating, throwing up, whatever. Would you be open to a discussion? Would you be open to having a discussion with me about ways that we can make some of what you're doing a little bit safer, at least, or at least improve what you're doing? Or for a lot of young people, would you be open to having a discussion about what we can do to reduce your anxiety? Because what I see often is young people coming in and they're doing what I've taught them to do, which is come in every 3 to 6 months, depending on how frequently you have sex, or come in every time you have a new sexual partner to get tested. So they're doing that, but they're coming in with so much anxiety. And I'm like, yeah, while I prefer for you not to be having sex, if you're going to be having sex, you shouldn't have this much anxiety surrounding the actual encounter. And your anxiety is completely about the fact that you don't know their status. You don't know if you've got an STI. What can we do to make this better? And that's how you get into these discussions of better safe practices, better sex practices and safer sex practices.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, as you just said, like not having the anxiety of maybe not knowing someone else's status or where your other partners might be lying on this. Do you sort of give, I guess, like tips on how to bring up those conversations and be able to, because so much of safe sex is communication with your partner/partners. And that's also, especially in the South, that can be a stigmatized thing. So how do you bring that up with young people?
No. So whether I'm talking to the providers to help them or the young person specifically, it's really, I tell them, your job, you have your agenda, right? Like all of us as providers, we're supposed to cover X, Y, and Z for whichever kind of visit we're seeing. But the key to covering those things efficiently and effectively while building rapport is to listen for your opening. And so I always teach people from the provider standpoint to be flexible. If you're supposed to talk about their asthma, but you're also supposed to talk about their sex, their mental health, their substance use, listen for that opening. If they're talking about their asthma, guess what? That's a direct line into their substance use, especially if it's like vaping, tobacco or weed, right? So like talk about their asthma, ask them how well they're doing in their sport or in school or whatever it is, and then tie that in. So it's all about flexibility. When I'm talking to the young person, I really, the same thing. I just listen for my opening. And then I ask a very open-ended question about, what would they be willing to listen to or hear today? Are they open to hearing today? Most of them say yes. Sometimes when they do say no, I'm like, that's cool. Just know, whenever you see me or another provider, we'll bring it up every time. Not because there's anything wrong with you. It's just because we want you to become the awesome person that you're meant to be. And when you have enough patients that hear you saying that, some of my more challenging patients have heard me say that for years. You're like, okay, Dr. Hill, let me go ahead and rattle off my answers because I know you're going to ask me these questions. That's literally what they do.
No, you're just going to say it again, so I might as well.
Exactly. And it keeps them thinking, though, because then when they actually do change something about their behavior, they come in and they tell you, like, well, guess what? Actually, I did X, Y, and Z. I remember having a patient, and this patient, he was a young teen. He had probably no less than 10 partners every time I would see him. So I'd see him like every 3 months, always around 10 partners. And he came in one time and I was like, okay, so what's going on? He's like, well, I have one partner. I was like, I'm sorry, what? He's like, I have one partner. I was like, okay, what brought that on?
Yeah.
So, that's just it is a surprise, but it's like, okay, let's see where their mindset is at now. Okay, they went from 10 partners all the time to one partner. What's happened? What's changed?
Yeah.
So yeah, you just kind of get into their head, just like their parents get into their head or their teacher or whoever.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great how you're able to notice how, again, just like talk about someone's sport or even just like, is this stressing you out, ties directly into their medical care, which I think is awesome. So you are also, I know you work in the clinic, but you're also an assistant professor at Emory, correct? Mm-hmm. So what exactly do you teach? I know you were with the School of Pediatrics, but what exactly do you teach and how does this funnel into teaching new healthcare providers?
Yeah, for me as a physician, the title of assistant professor is really just something they give you, like assistant, associate, or full professor, is what they give you if you're in an academic setting. So like being at Emory, Morehouse, UAB, UGA, those are all academic settings. What I teach, I usually teach clinically. So I don't teach like a college professor. Once a year, actually tomorrow, I partner with my colleague and we teach the first year med students about like developmental, like just normal adolescent development. But mostly I'm working with med students in years 3, 4, or pediatric OBGYN, family medicine residents from like Emory, Morehouse, UAB, wherever. Where we're talking about a bunch of different things, how to actually care for an adolescent. All of us that I work with have different niches. And so mine's obviously like sexual health. So I talk about general sexual health. We talk about HIV prevention. We talk about HIV management from like newborn to end of life. We talk about gender affirming care, in puberty, and, gender affirming hormones. I talk about trauma informed care. I talk about social determinants of health. I talk about just, how to do routine maintenance and how to do it well, vaccines. There's a lot of stuff that I touch on, just depends on the time of the year, the topic. Just to make sure, my goal is to make sure that, whether you're going into some kind of subspecialty or you finish med school, you finish residency, and you realize, I just want to be an admin, to make sure that you understand what it really takes to take care of a young person, particularly a teen, because they are different from, the K through 5, and they are different from the adults. And so middle school, high school, and then even the young adults that are in college and post-college, those are very unique periods. And what we do for the little kids and what we do for the adults really doesn't always work for all of the teens.
Gotcha. Oh, wonderful. So I guess I've just grilled you on your everything that you're doing, your career, what you're passionate about. But I would love to hear, just as I wrap things up, like, what do you like to do for fun? Like, what do you like to do outside of this?
Okay. Well, let me add something to your previous question.
Go first, and we'll do that next.
I forgot. I do research, so I'm funded by the NIH, and so I do a lot of research too on sexual health topics and HIV prevention. So that's just another.
Wow. Are you currently working on something?
Yeah, I have a couple of things that I'm working on.
I'd love to share anything.
Yeah. Like, one of the studies I'm working on is really trying to figure out how we can improve that sexual health literacy as well as empowerment with our sexual health with young people. This study is focused on Black teens specifically with the hope of expanding, but the goal is to use mHealth, so like our app phones, as well as adults who are positive support and role models, to kind of make that connection so that, if it's your coach, if it's your parent, if it's your older sibling, whoever, they can help fill in the gaps and provide you with money or transportation or just support around making positive sexual health choices. So that's one. I work with some other people on some trauma-informed care stuff, particularly in HIV settings, as well as how to actually improve, getting more young people to test, like just take a test to know their HIV status, and hopefully getting them onto PrEP if they need PrEP. Those are some of the studies I'm on.
Oh, I get now I'm thinking of other things. In terms of, and maybe this is part of, like, as you're saying, with the community and having, or at least a few people in your corner and a support system is so key to that. In terms of adherence, what do you find that is, I personally know, is it more difficult for young people to adhere to their treatment? I know that it's an issue all around, but is it do you find it's more difficult for young people? And what have you found is the best way to get people to adhere?
No. It's a good question. Support is really key. So, oftentimes those of us that work in HIV clinics, we know that we oftentimes become the support people for our patients, particularly for patients who don't have either family or close friends who are really trying to keep everything insular because of fear, which is completely normal. But we become their support system. And so even that is helpful. They come in, they give us big hugs or, whatever. But the key is really having support. When you have a young person that's had support, and then for whatever reason, they get this diagnosis, or maybe the diagnosis is associated with their sexuality or their gender or who knows what, right? But like, because of this diagnosis, people decide to pull away. You can see the difference. And so one of the things I actually talk about is the importance of how you disclose a young person's, or anybody, honestly, but disclose HIV status to people. And so I often offer, if I'm available, to help like my colleagues that are out in the community, that are like pediatrician, family docs, just doing the screening, because it is important, right? You don't want to disclose to the parent of Samantha that Samantha has HIV, and then Samantha finds out from her parent that she has HIV. That is a setup for disaster every time. And we lose so much time trying to rebuild trust, even though that person's never met me, Dr. Hill, the HIV clinic provider. When they come to see me for the first time, because their primary care provider disclosed to them in that way, I am starting way behind the 8 ball, trying to build rapport back into the healthcare system. Very little of what I say is what they will trust.
Yeah, that's a good point of that. It's how other physicians are also responsible for that trust for other care, because just with having, I guess, especially if you don't have a lot of, whether it's culturally or past experiences, that you don't have a lot of trust in the medical community, then it's important to take the step to recognize how can I be careful to make sure I don't put this person in a situation where they can't trust me and therefore future physicians, and that's so important to their care. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I always say tell the team first. I mean, if they're like 11, okay, just that's going to be a disaster most ways. But like if you can just stop and pause and think about how to tell the teen, and preferably in person. I think that's the other thing I see often, is that they're trying to call, just like they would with like gonorrhea or chlamydia. They're trying to call the teen. This is not something you want to call and disclose over the phone unless there's no other way to get in contact with them. You want to bring them in person, and then make sure you've got time to like answer questions, because there's going to be a barrage of questions. Offer them a way to help them tell their parent with them, tell their parent for them, but like talk to them first.
Give them the agency to make that choice within it. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's all right. Well, I have 7 minutes left in the meeting. So I'd love to close off with you sharing a little bit about what you like to do outside of all the amazing work that you do.
Yes, I love to travel. I'm definitely a foodie, but I love to travel the world, and I love to eat the world's cuisines. Prior to moving to back home to Atlanta, I was a CrossFitter as well, and so just trying to find the right CrossFit gym. Yeah. So I love fitness and being outside. Love the beach. Love the water. And then I have a dog here somewhere who's probably sleeping. Malcolm, he's like 2.5, almost 3.
That's a perfect dog name. That's so cute. Yeah. Where's your favorite place that you've traveled to?
Ooh, so I went to Colombia this year. Loved Colombia. I was in Cartagena and was pleasantly surprised. I was also pleasantly surprised by Puerto Rico. I just got back from Munich. Need to get to Berlin, but Munich actually wasn't as bad. I need to bring tennis shoes next time. I had to go buy tennis shoes because I brought like cutesy shoes, not what you want. But Munich was actually pretty cool too.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah. Well, then I will wrap it up from here, but I'm so glad that we were able to work this out. It was so great to hear from you, and I'm very excited. I'll let you know when things get uploaded and stuff, and of course, stay in touch. But yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Thank you for shedding light and sharing your genius.
Not my genius. Thank you. Well, you have a great rest of your day. You take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.